The 2020 Minority Health Film Festival offers a diverse variety of films and events that we just wouldn't be able to offer in the in-person cinema experience. But I think what really makes it unique is the focus not only on public health issues, but the issues that really concern communities of color. If you're looking for a reason to engage or to try it out, this is the perfect time. Just go to mkefilm.org/MHFF.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Time After Time panel discussion. My name is Monique Graham, and I am the Director of Community Engagement at Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin Health Network. I am honored to be here today to bring to you an amazing discussion on a much needed topic. Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin Health Network, we're so honored to partner with Milwaukee Film to bring the Minority Health Film Festival into these virtual spaces. And I would love to just acknowledge this is day 9 of the Minority Health Film Festival. And we are so excited about just bringing this and how we've transitioned in these current times. I'd also like to just quickly acknowledge the project team. The project team from Milwaukee Film includes Gerard Blanks as well as Maureen Post. The Froedtert team project team includes Heidi Moore, Linda Gonzalez, and Corey Smith. And there are a host of internal stakeholders from both organizations that have really helped to bring this to our virtual spaces. So I want to say thank you again for joining us today for this Time After Time panel discussion focused on a much needed roundtable discussion that addresses the struggles that many families endure as we watch our loved ones who are diagnosed, and I would also add some who are not diagnosed, but how they suffer with dementia or Alzheimer's disease. We will discuss symptoms, we'll discuss early warning signs, we'll discuss resources and support, ways that are out there to help you cope or help family members cope with the challenges of this disease. So what I like to do is to bring on our esteemed panel. And as you can imagine, the panel has a rich background. Our panel features the film director, Miss Renee Chenault Fattah. It also features Lisa Jennings. She is a mentor and caregiver. Tasha Robinson, who is the executive director at Age at Home. And then Gina Green-Harris, the director at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. So what I'd like to do is just bring each panelist on so they can share a little bit about themselves directly with you. And I'm going to start with Renee.
Thank you so much, Monique. I am a lawyer, a former TV broadcast journalist, a filmmaker, and currently I work at the Senior Law Center here in Philadelphia. Before I talk about the film and a little bit about myself, I really want to say thank you to the Minority Health Film Fair Festival, Milwaukee Film Festival. I just learned a few days ago that it was the sort of brainchild of Gerard Blanks to do this. And it really speaks to why I wanted to make this film, my film, In Our Right Mind, Alzheimer's and Other Dementias Impacting Communities of Color. I made the film because I wanted to start a conversation around a disease that disproportionately impacts our community. I spent some 2 years traveling the country, talking to caregivers, to people living with Alzheimer's and dementias, to researchers, to doctors, to people in the community, because again, I wanted to have a conversation around this. When I left TV news, I knew that I wanted to still tell stories, but it was in finding a subject that I sort of realized that, you know, as I was approaching 60, it seemed like overnight all of my close friends were either becoming caregivers for their parents, or they were themselves starting to have some cognitive challenges. And then when I heard that one of the people who I had always looked up to over the decades, Harvard law professor Charles Ogletree, announced that at age 62, he had Alzheimer's. But more to the point, he said that this was a disease that disproportionately impacted African Americans. Now, I should have known this, because when you think about it, and we're certainly seeing that now in COVID-19, we are disproportionately impacted across the board. And I know we're going to be talking about that during the course of this hour. But when he said that, I knew that this was the story that I had to tell. I just assumed that because we were disproportionately impacted, there would be all sorts of stories out there about us and our community in this disease. Found out that there wasn't. And that truly was sort of the motivation to focus a spotlight on a disease that robs us of our stories, that impacts our community. And again, just very appreciative that we didn't allow COVID-19 to stop the conversation, because perhaps more now than ever, this is what we need to be talking about. Thank you, Monique.
Yes, thank you, Renee. Thank you. You're just the first panelist, and I'm already excited about getting into this conversation. This is really going to be an amazing conversation. I'd like to bring Lisa Jennings up. And Lisa, can you share about yourself?
Hi, thanks again, Monique, for this opportunity. My name is Lisa Jennings, and I have been a caregiver for both my parents, who were both diagnosed with dementia. I lost my dad in March of 2017, and this movie touched me because it was like my story. One of the young ladies, I could almost finish her stories, her sentences, and the stories that were being told. I could totally relate because I had experienced those things as well. The crazy part about it is that I didn't really pay attention to dementia and Alzheimer's until it hit my family, and I became a caregiver. And then I didn't know anything, so I'm learning everything as I go. I think this is awesome to give people the feedback and the comments and the things that they need to move forward with this. I don't think people realize how this affects families, how largely it affects families. So I'm excited for this.
Right. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. It is so important to have that caregiver influence and just as a part of this discussion. There, as you said, Lisa, there's so much we don't know, and you're learning as you go with this. So thank you for joining us as well. Next, I'd like to bring up Tasha and have Tasha share about herself as well.
Hello, everyone. Thanks again, Monique, for this opportunity. My name is Tasha Robinson, and I am the Executive Director of Age at Home by Your Grace. I am a nurse by background, a licensed practical nurse, and I have been in the medical field for about 25 years now. The first 5 of those years I spent being a caregiver, a CNA, and a phlebotomist, so working a lot with people in memory cares and people that had dementia and Alzheimer's diagnosis. Then went on to go to school and become a nurse and live on the opposite side of it. So the person who was given the medication, who was doing the assessing, who was coaching the caregivers as they were working with people, and how to handle behaviors and how to adapt to their world. And then I got into home care. So I worked mostly in facilities in the beginning, and I got into home care, which I found to be my first love, because people are able to be in their homes. And when people have Alzheimer's and dementia, what I've noticed and learned is that the possibility of falls, some of the behaviors, things like that, sort of lessen because they're in their own environment. You're not taking them out of their home and not introducing them to new people every single day. And I got a chance to work with families and educate them on how to handle some of the things that were happening, the changes, because a lot of times, as a couple other people have mentioned, it does greatly affect the family. What you notice in 1 out of 4 families is that usually the families all fall apart, but there's that one family that does cling together, and they decide to work together as a family to help handle or to take care of their loved one. And to me, the home care environment was just a great one. So that's what I'm currently doing now. And I partner with another nurse who manages my group of caregivers. We have roughly 136 of them, and we have about 256 clients that we see in the community. And we partner with the Dementia and Alzheimer's Alliance in the Madison area, who provides a special grant to people in the community to afford our services. And it's to really allow those family caregivers to get that much needed break that they want, the ones that have not left their home to go grocery shopping, who cannot get out and go out for dinner or any of those kind of things. So my joy is being able to allow those home caregivers to do that and to provide any education I can to them and to the caregivers I have going in the homes.
Great. Yes, thank you, Tasha. Thank you for bringing that clinical experience and just the wealth of experience on both sides, as you said, in healthcare. And you touched on another point that I hope we'll have time to talk about a little bit, is that the grants and the support that may be out there, and what are these types of resources that really can, that we can tap into that we may not know about. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And then rounding out our esteemed panel is Gina. And so I'd love to have Gina share a little bit more about herself.
Good morning. A little bit about me. So I'm first of all, I just want to say thank you to Monique, to the film festival, to the panelists. I am excited to sit with you guys. This is fantastic. I am excited that we're going to have this wonderful, well-needed talk. As Monique said, I'm the director of the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute Regional Milwaukee office, and our office is specifically designed to help families on the Alzheimer's disease journey, particularly from minority populations. And our focus is African American communities in specific, along with our Latinx community families. And what we do is we have a unique office that has 5 pillars where we do advocacy through our community advisory board that actually leads us and guides us and tells us the priorities that we need to set around folks who are living with Alzheimer's and dementia. Our community advisory board consists of people who are living with Alzheimer's disease, who have caregivers, as well as social workers who have experienced dementia firsthand, which we could talk about later. And then we also connect through organizations, other organizations. So we do that through advocacy. We actually have a model very similar to what Tasha's talking about, where we support families by going into the homes to actually offer care support to them and help them transition their resources so that they will be able to have one-stop shopping, so that they don't have to call multiple agencies time and time again. And we try to make sure we reduce the burden for those families. And then we do programming. We have an amazing Grace Chorus that actually works with caregivers and families to have positive experience on the Alzheimer's journey. And we do other things as well, dementia wellness programs for those who are high risk for dementia. And we make sure that we're doing this through a cultural lens that is relative specifically to communities of color. And then we do research. We have a research program that actually is looking at long-term preclinical but family history of Alzheimer's disease to actually say how what's happening in Black families, what's happening overall with family history. And then we're trying to also study now clinical issues. So we're doing lumbar punctures or MRIs. We're doing a ton of work around research to figure this out, and how can we build on that to actually hopefully one day find a cure, but in that meantime, reduce risk for our community. And then finally, we do diagnosing. So we have a what we call Diagnostic Memory Clinic Network throughout the state of Wisconsin that actually is, and so thank you to Medical College in Frederick. They have one. There's 5 in the Milwaukee area that actually are designed specifically to help families get diagnosed. And then there's a care support team that actually helps those families as they transition on this journey of Alzheimer's disease. So we're clearly excited to be a part of this work. Our motto, I'll just tell you, is meet the people where they are. And we really make sure that we're meeting community needs. I will say this as well. Our programs are at no cost to the community. On whatever programs we do, it was always important that we do so that we would not have to exclude families from participating, but have more inclusion. So happy to talk about that more. Again, thank you for having me join this esteemed panel.
Thank you so much, Gina. And we will definitely look forward to digging into more to all of the information you just shared, as well as each of our panelists. Before we really jump in, I thought it would be great for us to just level set. So you hear Alzheimer's, you hear dementia, you hear the terms interchanged, at random, at will. And so I'd like to open it up. Definitely, I think Gina and Tasha would have some input on that. But to all the panelists, really, what is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's from a term standpoint? So you're hearing people say, well, my loved one was diagnosed with dementia, or my loved one was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And then in the conversation, you'll hear both of the terms and you're trying to figure out exactly what that means. So can you just break that down for us a little bit?
So yeah, I'm happy to start, and Tasha, feel free to jump in. So, and my apologies in advance for speaking with my hands, but that's what I do.
That's good.
And so, if you were to have an umbrella in front of us, we would open that umbrella up, and that umbrella itself would represent dementia. Dementia is like a syndrome, right? It's the overall impact of when we talk about memory loss, and that's where we look at the symptoms when people are talking about I'm losing my memory, cognition is leaving, and you have all of these symptoms that are relative to memory loss, and then underneath that, once that diagnosis is made, you have to go through a lot of testing and assessments, and I'll talk a little bit about those too. But at that point of saying, yes, you have memory loss, you have dementia, the next question would be, what type of dementia do we have, right? So that's the basic essentials of it. And then that's where you hear Alzheimer's disease. And the reason people say Alzheimer's disease is because that's the most common form of dementia. And some of those characteristics of Alzheimer's disease are things like the memory loss. You think about language deficits. People are having trouble finding their words, right? Rapid forgetting. Those are classic symptoms of Alzheimer's disease in terms of symptomatic hallmarks. And in the brain, it looks a little different. But when we think about it from a perspective of everyday people, those are the signs we're looking for. Affect changes. So why is that important? Because Alzheimer's disease its hallmark is slow and insidious. So if you had a mountain and you were climbing down, you would just go down on an angle, right? And it's longer, and its pathology takes longer. And then there's so that's Alzheimer's disease. Then the other second most common type of dementia would be vascular dementia. And that's where we really find a lot of our African American families between mixed and vascular. And vascular is just what it says. It really is neurological in symptomatics. And most often it comes from things like small strokes, right? It comes from mild infracts in the brain, white matter issues. And so it really is vascular. And that trajectory, or the way that symptomatically actually responds, it's a little more different than Alzheimer's, and that is more abrupt. Right. So it's like a stair step, right? You're going down the stairs, you're doing fine for a while, and then you have an abrupt change. And that's really when we see the differences from vascular to Alzheimer's disease, right? And then there's Lewy body, frontal temporal, right? And all of those have different hallmark signs. And what's really important about I won't go into detail with those, but what we do know is that when we look at frontal temporal, right, it's insidious onset, but frontal temporal can come from traumatic brain injury. And that's where you hear the people, remember we were talking about football players and how they were having traumatic brain injury and they were having this frontal temporal piece. That's where that came from. And that's really, some of those hallmarks are really social inappropriateness. People who never use profanity will use profanity, or people who are commonly quiet or no longer quiet. Those things are what we see with people who are having that frontal temporal. So, and actually, again, I will reinforce, it's really interesting that while Alzheimer's disease is the largest and most common form of dementia, for people of color, what the research is finding is that it's more mixed dementias. And so it could be, I've got a little Alzheimer's and frontal temporal, Alzheimer's and vascular. And that is becoming a category itself, mixed dementias as well. And I don't know, Tasha, you might want to add to that, but that
you did perfect. You really did perfect. I can honestly say that you did an awesome job.
I guess, the only thing I would want to just add to that, the title of my film, Alzheimer's and Other Dementias Impact, I would constantly get the question, well, why are you making the distinction? And for the very reason that Dr. Green-Harris just laid out for us. So there's this information that is there, but it doesn't get to us often. And in interviewing people, I would hear them say, well, he just has a little dementia. It's not Alzheimer's. So again, hearing those sorts of things, and we tried to lay it out in the film, and it was very frustrating because, there's so much to get in there in just an hour, but it was really important to lay it out just the way you did, Dr. Green-Harris, in terms of, Alzheimer's being, one form of dementia, just the most common. But I think what you were saying about mixed dementias for African Americans also goes to the issue of why it's so hard to come up with a cure or effective treatments, because those are all different, and require different modalities. So, but
and I will. I will also say what's interesting is that, and by the way, I'm not Dr. Green-Harris yet. I am in a PhD program, but I'll take that as a confirmation that I'm going to make it through.
We walk on faith, okay? We walk on faith.
We're going to do faith. But I will say that, and I think it's really important, the point you bring out about treatment. While the treatment modality might be the same in terms of clinical treatment, right? We know for a lot of the research is showing that social engagement is critical to people who have any form of this cognitive decline and cognitive impairment. We know that also diet is important. We know exercise is important. We know there are some things that we can do to help people that are on this journey have even better experiences. It won't stop the progression of the disease. And that's important to say too, to our community. But having the understanding of what to expect and is really what our caregivers say is really helpful for them. As they see their loved one transition, they recognize the transitional pieces, and then they know what to do. And actually, for us, what not to do. And I just want to thank you for Renee for actually the title In My Right Mind, because as Black folks, that's critical to us, that we stay in our right minds, because if you know our history around church, our faith, our beliefs, it's all about right mind. So I think that's really important.
Thank you. So I love this, and I have questions, and I was like, it's going to go like this. You all have blown that up, which is great. So we're just going to keep moving with it. And I want to thank you for that. Gina, you talked about, as you described the different types and the vascular, that it's associated with vascular diseases really trigger dementia and Alzheimer's. And we know that African Americans are disproportionately impacted by high blood pressure and high cholesterol. And then you add some of the economic challenges, you add some of the, the stresses that people of color, communities of color typically have. And so what I want to open it up to the group is, one, we talked about this, but I want to have someone restate it. And the question is, does dementia affect certain ethnic groups at a higher rate? And Renee, you had that stated at your film, at the beginning of the film, but I really want to just get that stated again so that folks understand. And then beyond that, really talking about, currently we can't prevent it, but there are things we can do. And Gina, you spoke about that a little bit about lifestyle. So again, are other groups more affected by it, and what are some things we can do to, again, we can't prevent it, but we know that may help in that diagnosis.
Yeah, Monique, I'm so glad that the film festival kicked off with Dr. Camera Jones,
Oh, yeah.
because she talks about this issue like no one else can. When you think about racial disparities, whether it's Alzheimer's, whether it's diabetes, whether it's hurricane, she says, or, climate change, we are disproportionately impacted. And we're disproportionately impacted because we have, there's a disparate, there's a difference, there's a distinction between the opportunities that we're given and the risk that we are exposed to. And that's rooted in systemic racism. And, if there's anything positive to come out of COVID, it is that while all of us know that disparities have existed, this has been given a wider lens, and the focus is on. And while it's certainly important, and I talked about this in the film, diet and exercise and lifestyle, we can talk about those things, but yet at the same time say, wait, you can't tell people you eat healthy and you live in a food desert, or you live in a place where it's not safe to walk, or you don't have adequate housing. We have to focus on both of those things. So this is disparity, this is inequality, and again, it's rooted in racism. And I'm glad that the conversation is being had. And we have to make sure it's not just a moment, that this is a conversation that continues, if we're not going to be back in the same place 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just add to what Renee is saying? And I think you're money on, Renee. The numbers clearly say, so the data is up to 2 point, African Americans are up to 2 times more likely to develop dementia. And our Latinx community is up to 1.5 times more likely. And couple of things that I think that is important about that goes to not only the lateness of diagnosing, right? When are we getting diagnosed for dementia? How are we getting, and what access do we have, right, to getting a good diagnosis? And I think that's critical to the conversation. And then after or before, recognizing that, to your point, the social determinants of health are critical to this, our diet, our nutrition. But that's why we have been saying we need to have programs that are in the community, that are safe, that if we know, quite frankly, it's about diet, exercise, et cetera, our responsibility is to make sure that we're bringing things to the community that they can do to actually bring about change. So we're going to the senior high rises, we're going to our public housing, right? We're going to places that we know need this kind of support and help, because that's where the dementia is lying, right? When we're talking about risk factors. So I appreciate you bringing that out. But then I also think, listening to our caregivers, and Lisa, I do want to shout out and say thank you so much for being brave enough to share your story, because families, in particular brown families, we need to hear the stories to actually know how to be better supporters of you all. And that is what's critical to all of our work anyway. So, but yes, definitely wanted to share that.
I would like to share too. My parents were not diagnosed until almost in their late 80s. And they used to walk at Bayshore Mall like on a regular basis 4 or 5 times a week, and they tried to eat right. And my mother got diagnosed with diabetes, and she sat in the hospital, and she was like in this whole frame of mind. And I'm like, what's wrong? And she was like, but I did everything right. I took my vitamins, I walked, I did, I tried to eat well. And she was like, how did I get here? And I was like, sometimes it's just age. You just can't outlive certain things. But even with the vascular dementia that she was diagnosed with, it comes so quick because it can be in a urinary tract infection, and it's something that you don't even think about. And then she gets confused as to who I am and who my daughter is. And it's like, now we know something's wrong, right? Which the last time she had a UTI, it ended up going into her bloodstream. And it went quick. So it wasn't even something that I could be like, oh, I can get her to the hospital. But then as a caregiver, I blame me. Like, what did I miss? What didn't I see?
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for sharing. And we can just see, the emotion and passion definitely expressed from Lisa, but all of our panelists around the table. We talked about, communities of color, particularly African Americans, tend to be diagnosed at a later stage. I just remember hearing people say, oh, Big Mama just got confused, or
Yep.
grandfather just got lost, right? And
Yep.
it was just we didn't think much more about it,
Yep.
which tends to lend it to the different stage. And so I guess my question is, what are some of those signs and symptoms that we should be aware of, and mindful of when it comes to, because we typically will just be like, yeah, Big Mama just got confused or forgot, and that was due to age, or mama, at this point. So what are some of those signs and symptoms?
For my mother-in-law, what we noticed is taking her out of her environment. So we took her, she went to visit my brother-in-law in Minnesota, and it literally showed everything. She didn't know who people were. She didn't know what to do. It just, when you take a person out of that natural environment, you see everything, because in your environment, you this is your space, but you step outside that door. It's like me with my glasses. I have them off now. I'm in my home. I'm fine. If I step out that door,
Yeah.
I will know I don't have them on.
Right.
So being outside their environment, you see those simple slips like finding keys in the refrigerator, putting food that's supposed to be in the refrigerator in the cabinet somewhere. Things like that happen. Sometimes it could be them thinking someone's going to harm them. I've heard people say things like, my dad stopped eating my mom's food and kept saying she was trying to poison them. Now, as a family, sometimes it may seem like a joke. Oh, he's talking about mom's cooking. But no, it was a serious underlying issue that was happening. And going to places that they remembered. I had a friend whose dad was a corrections officer who had retired. He was not the officer, I'm sorry, he was the warden. He had retired and left, and his memory issues took him back there. He walked in the building and people knew him because he was the warden. So he was able to walk around the general population of inmates because they assumed he was supposed to be there. But it was his memory issues that were taking him there. And he had this briefcase that had nothing in it. And he's inside this building because this is what's familiar to him.
Following up on that, a lot of the people who I interviewed, one of the first, and it was like a consistent theme, one of the sort of signals or warning signs was getting confused about money. Checks, a person who every month was paying that bill on time, it was going 4 and 5 months late. Or, they weren't making payments on their life insurance, or, they said somebody was in their bank account. That seemed to be a common theme, in terms of sending off warning signals that something wasn't right, which is why you're starting to see a move towards the financial industry working with the health care industry to maybe put some safeguards in place, or to address what is a common theme.
One thing I didn't hear mentioned yet, but it's very common, is hallucinations.
Yes.
We dealt with hallucinations a lot with my dad, and we were going through a voting period, and he thought people were in our home trying to vote, and they were standing in the furniture, and I didn't know what was going on. I happened to walk in the living room, and he was moving furniture, and I'm like, wait, what's happening? And he said, you don't see all these people? And again, learning, I had to really learn how to be like, it's okay, we told him to come. Like, I had to learn how to make a quick story real quick, and I used to joke and, just to kind of keep it light, be like, oh, he keeps me on my toes. But even in his hospice situation, he wanted a watch. I couldn't find the watch, but I found a rubber band. I put the rubber band on his wrist. Wow. He touched it and he was okay. After he realized something was on his wrist, in his mind, it was his watch, even though it was just a rubber band. But again, just having to come up with that quick thought, because he was trying to get out the bed, because he was like, you're going to help me find it.
Yeah, but Lisa, you hit on something so important. So many people don't know how to do that and don't know that that's the most important thing to do.
Exactly.
We have this movie and this book out, What to Expect When You're Expecting, right? But there is nothing sitting there telling people what to expect in this situation. And it's really like that. And I deal with that every single day with my caregivers going in homes, and they talk about, oh, well, this client did this or they did that. And I go, you do realize this is the disease. It's not
Yes,
them.
yes,
The thing that
Yeah.
we have
yes.
to do as a person who's in our right mind, because we're still in our right mind, how to respond to it. I have a lady who, when they go to her home, the first 2 hours is her kicking them out of the house. But you know what you do? You get out the house. You go sit in your car for 15 minutes. You go
Yeah,
knock on the door again, and then you reapproach, and you
yeah,
keep reapproaching until you get in the door. You're being paid the whole time, so it doesn't matter. So this is the game you're going to play today.
yeah,
This is what we're going to have to do. You can't snap them into your reality. You
yeah.
need to go to theirs.
Right.
You have to meet them where they are if you're going to make this a meaningful kind of connection with them.
Right.
You
But
know?
just think about, Lisa, you saying that and being so smart to not argue and to be
Yeah.
creative. But what a pressure and what a constant burden on the caregiver on top of
Yep.
everything else you're
Yep.
dealing with. And
Yep.
that's something that I was hoping to accomplish in the film by focusing on caregivers and the struggles
Mhm.
that you have. And, it's great if there's a family that's supportive, but in one instance it seems to always fall on one family member. But just the incredible pressure, and now of course with COVID, not only are you dealing with somebody with cognitive issues, but you're worrying about keeping them socially distanced, and are they doing, it's just, I just
Yeah.
worry that not enough focus is on caregivers.
Yeah.
I
You
think
know,
too that
And
family members don't understand too. Like when we started facing it, I was being told by people, "This is in your head. You're making it worse than what it is. They're not really this sick.
yeah,
This isn't what's happening." And it's like,
Wow.
but what do I gain?
right.
right, right, right,
From this
Yeah.
being the
right,
situation. It's like, and
right.
I'm really sharing because I wanted their help.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm being told that I'm actually lying about
Mm-hmm.
the whole situation.
Right.
And I had to again step back. And it took a while because I was angry. It
Sure.
took a while for me to step back and be like, okay, this is how they're processing this.
Mm-hmm.
And they're in denial. And unfortunately, I didn't have a space to be in denial. I just had to jump in and do what I
Right.
had to do
Yeah.
and then be forgiving because they're in denial.
Mm-hmm.
Don't take it
And
personal.
right. And
Right.
it's interesting the way Lisa's explaining and what all you guys are all saying, and that's what we experience too, is that, one, typically in families, whether your family has 20 people or two, there's a high probability. It's just like at church. Only a fraction of
Mm-hmm.
the people are going to help.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
the ones who are not helping are going to be there to judge.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so sometimes what happens is that, and Lisa, I understand exactly what you're saying. The people who are not in your space and only see your parents for small periods of time typically will think that you're making things
Right.
up.
Because
And
they
what
will.
I have heard, and I know Renee, you've done your work, and Tasha, you're doing your work, but what I've heard works is when you ask that those members of the family in particular who don't believe you to come and spend some time with these
Mm-hmm.
people.
It changes
Yeah.
everything.
Spend a day with them. And
Exactly.
sometimes it's a half a day will do it.
Exactly.
But spend some real
Exactly.
time. And then most often it says, we see what you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
now.
Yep.
Or
Mhm.
it's like Tasha said, taking them out of their element, right?
Yep.
Because
Yes.
it's like when you change your furniture around, if you turn the lights out, you're gonna bump into something, right?
Mhm.
But if
Yep.
you know where everything is,
Right.
typically you'll navigate that. So I think that's really critical to this. And then Lisa, I do want to say I'm so glad you're sharing your story
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
that impact of figuring out one, the guilt. Did I miss something with that
Mm-hmm.
UTI? Well, most often it's a no. You're
Mm-hmm.
doing what you need to do, and things happen. And it's really trying to figure out how, once what resources are there once you find out, right?
Mhm.
How do I then recognize, what can I do next time to help,
Mm-hmm.
while you can't control the UTI, that's not on you. And I think we really have to get caregivers to a point of not owning things that you can't control, if that
Exactly.
makes sense. And I think
Mhm.
that's really important. Or the issue of saying this is not personal, this is the disease.
Right.
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 Separating the person and the disease. Because what we also hear oftentimes from daughters, because by the way, the data shows
It's women.
daughters are the caregivers,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
daughters are caregiving while they're raising families, while they
Mm-hmm.
have full-time jobs, while we're in school, while we're doing all these other things, but we're still trying to focus and center our attention on our loved ones. And so I think that's a critical point too. And by the way, most Black caretakers are non-paid, meaning
Yes.
family or friends.
Yeah.
So that's important to know too. And so I
Yes.
say all that to say, when we're looking at how do we structure resources and support, the thing is, as people of color, we don't really always want to go to a support group, but we do need to find that sister group, right? You
Yeah.
need to
Right.
find people who are outside of, maybe not even in your family, but your best friends. Start we get clubs where we got these online clubs now. I just need to talk to somebody
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
understands me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those are the things that we use to help us on our journeys, right? When
Yeah.
it comes to and Monique, I'm going to stop there because I know you were going to ask another question, so I'll stop there.
You know what?
And I just wanted to just piggyback onto that just real quick, because while you're right, caregivers need to reach out and get support. From what I found from talking to people, the family, it's incumbent. I can't
Mm-hmm.
tell you the number of times I heard a family member say, well, I offered, well, what can I do to
Mm-hmm.
help? What can I do to
Mm-hmm.
help? That is such a burden.
Yep.
Why not just flip it around and say, here's what I can do to help? Don't
Yep.
Yes.
add to the
Yes.
caregiver
Exactly.
by having to
Yes.
come
Mm-hmm.
up with something.
Right.
Come to the person, come to the
Yep.
caregiver, where I'll take
Yep.
them to the store. I'll sit with them for,
Right.
an
Yes.
hour or
Mm-hmm.
two to keep them in their environment.
Right. Or
But
you know what, Renee? I will sit with your loved one while you go do something for
yes,
yourself.
yes,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
exactly,
other piece.
exactly.
Caregiver
But
burden.
present it as an
Yes.
option versus
Yes.
making the caregiver do one more thing, coming up
Right.
Mm-hmm.
with what you can
Yeah.
do to help her
Yeah.
or
That's
him.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're talking about social networks, that's really important too,
Hmm.
so that those social networks, to your point, are reaching out to the
Yes.
caregiver and
Yes.
saying, "How can we help you?"
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Very
Yeah.
then
much
as a
so.
caregiver, understanding everyone doesn't understand your situation at
Right.
all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
when you're sharing something, the one lady in your movie was like, she had shared, and somebody was like, girl, you better be happy you still got your mother. And
Right.
it's
Right.
not
Right.
that I'm
Right.
not thankful for that. It's
Exactly.
just I'm
Right.
Yeah.
going through some straight challenges that are
Yeah.
very hard with
Yeah.
that. And that
That's a good point.
argument piece, because they're independent, especially like with my
Mm-hmm.
mom. She was so independent, she did
Mm-hmm.
everything. And now to lean on me to do things, she feels like she's still my mother. She should be taking
Hmm.
care of me, not this other way around.
Yeah.
So it's very hard when I say, Ma, you have to ask for help. If you need to do something, let me help you.
Hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then 5 minutes later, she's trying to do something on her own again. And I've
Mm-hmm.
had to just be like, okay, we just gonna, I didn't want to fix the mess. I just have to fix the mess,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
and be okay with it. And I have not
Mm-hmm.
handled that
Mm-hmm.
portion very
It's
well,
hard.
but
It's hard.
And
You
you know,
know.
Lisa, that's a really great point because our loved ones, they tend to understand something is not right, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, when our loved ones, they're like, I know something is off. I'm not completely myself.
Hmm.
And so you all just talked about, just some of the different ways that we support them and what does that support look like? And Marcia on the movie, she was very vulnerable. And I remember her saying, I sometimes say mean things, because she
Yeah.
was so frustrated. And I didn't want to, and it doesn't mean I love my mother any
Hmm.
less.
mm-hmm.
But she showed her human. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
human,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
I'm dealing with quite a lot. And so we touched a little bit about things we can do, such as they'll tend to ask the same questions over and over again, and instead of saying, "Well, I told you," just repeat
Mm-hmm.
your
Hmm.
answer and
Hmm.
answering their questions. And what are things that we can do? So what are things we can do? And then I would love to morph into some of the resources and support. You all talked about some of it and how there are nuances in African American communities and communities of color, because we may not gravitate toward a support group, but we do need
Mhm.
that support, and we do want to understand what resources are out there to help us.
Mm-hmm. So I can talk a little bit about resources and some of the other stuff you mentioned. I think I will say this too in terms of caregiver support. We have to do, I agree with Renee, we have to do a much better job, particularly reaching our communities of color caregivers, because a
Mhm.
lot of our programs are specifically designed for majority populations. And what I mean by that is that, there are some ethnic and cultural differences as to
Hmm.
how we talk to our loved ones,
Hmm.
how we look at care for our loved ones. And sometimes the programs are very restrictive or just rudimentary, and that are not necessarily some things, we incorporate our faith into everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of those programs don't do that. And then we also make sure that, location is important to people of color. I'll give a real quick story for this, because I think one of the questions talks about how does racism play a role in dementia. And one of those is, so picture it this way. My loved one, my dad is in his 80s, 70s, 80s, right? Well, he grew up in the era where he couldn't go certain places.
Yeah.
And so we're asking him to go into places that in his current state of memory may be taboo, or may not be open to him, or may not, or his memory is, I can't go there, or how they treated him so poorly, right? Hospitals, think about this, clinics. Whereas today we can go in the front door, when they were younger, we couldn't go in the front door. And depending on where they were raised, so keeping our families migrated, a lot of them from the South. So there were different rules in the South than they are in the North. So we could not have access to the same care. And so that carries over oftentimes, right, with people who are older, who are in the stages of dementia. So it could be, I'm not going over there. I can't cross the 6th Street Bridge. I can't go across 27th Street, because that's the mindset that we have. So that plays a role. The type of care we receive plays a role. Providers who have a mindset that, particularly people of color, are not going to necessarily follow treatment plans or follow through with care instructions, have a different way of treating us sometimes. I'm not saying it's intentional, but I am saying there's some unconscious bias that can happen with people who are Black and or of color, or even just the care treatment, right? So you guys know, when we go to the hospital or to the doctor, how many of us are going? All of us. And so that's a very different care model than what a lot of our providers are used to. So they're like, why are y'all in the room?
Exactly. Which speaks, so
True.
beautifully to we can't talk about this and not talk about the healthcare system and the lack of access. And like you said, Gina, the implicit bias, and how there's got to be almost a whole rethinking of how doctors and healthcare professionals are made aware of their biases. We've got to have more of us in the room. I'm talking about as doctors. I mean, it was very important to me in doing this documentary that I interviewed African-American doctors and experts or women, because we know that, we want to see people who look like us treating us, and again, this is part of the systemic. That's why this has to be part of, we have to be front and center of this larger conversation around the disparities that are just across the board.
Right. Yeah. And I will just quickly say some specific resources are things like the Alzheimer's Association. They're in every state. They care for families. They have support groups. They have groups for memories in the making for people who are living with dementia. They have all kinds of activities. They do some research. Our own institution, the UW Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute, with the work that we do specifically in Milwaukee, our program, but also the diagnostic memory clinics to get your loved ones diagnosed. Frederick is a part of that. Medical College is a part of that. Other specific area hospitals are a part of that, and care centers. So it's places that you could go. But what's really important, the Aging Disability Resource Centers are important in this care continuum. And then there are nonprofits like what Tasha's doing. We really need to do a better job of supporting and really bringing visible nonprofit organizations. There are a lot of people who are doing this work. And to me, the most important part about gathering those resources is to reduce caregiver burden, and to make sure your loved ones can stay home safer and longer. Because, and I'm sure you guys have found this to be true, if you, any caregiver really, but particularly in communities of color, our number one goal is usually to keep our loved one home as long as possible, as safe as possible.
It's a cultural thing. There's a clinical neuropsychologist, Dr. Stephanie Johnson, who's written about this. I'm sure you know Stephanie.
She's my good friend. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, she just wrote the article talking about the cultural issues that are involved here. We are used to taking care of our own at home, African Americans, Latinx, And, there are resources. And Tasha, that's why I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing, especially when you look at what's happening in long-term
Mhm.
care facilities where we're concerned. Once again,
Yep.
disproportionately being impacted by COVID and all that comes with it.
Most certainly. And I'm in the Dane County area. So I'm part of a larger organization called the Grace. The Grace is a hospice in Dane County. So we actually have a hospice program, palliative care. We have Age at Home, which is my non-medical in-home support program. And then we also have a memory care suite. And I have access to a lot of information when it comes to this. So we do provide a lot of education to families that seek our services. They have, number one, a steady stream in one place of communication. So if they come in under the Age at Home program and that person progresses and they need something more, maybe they've had their doctor work with them, maybe they are on medications, maybe there's behaviors that are just really, hey, this is really different for us. I have access to two of the greatest, I say, geriatric psychologists in the country that I can go to, and I can use them as a resource and ask for help for this family. And on top of that, we have a direct connection with the Dementia and Alzheimer's Alliance in Dane County. They provide every year $20,000 worth of it's a $20,000 grant. So each family gets roughly $1,000, and then they tap into extra areas based on that person's diagnosis or their special needs. And they are allowed to come in our program and use those dollars. And what it does is provide relief to those family members that can go to those support groups that people say, well, why don't you go to a support group? Great. Who's going to sit here when I'm at the support group?
Yeah.
You're giving me an outlet, but I have no support to get there. So I
Yeah.
need the support to get there. So we provide that for them. And, I worked in the memory care setting. And when I worked in memory care setting as a director, the number one thing that I had from my dementia specialist is for them to provide support groups in the evening for the spouses who had loved ones in that memory care unit. And it was amazing to me to see all of them get together and have that conversation about their loved one. It's the male or the wife or the husband having those conversations about how it is affecting them in their late age. They're retired and expect to be sitting at their retirement,
Yeah.
in their home. And they come every day to visit and watch their spouse and how they have to feed them and do things with them. So to me, in Dane County, the Dementia Alzheimer's Alliance is a great place, and also the ADRC is a good place. We partner with them in some of the smaller counties that we cover, and they provide small grants to families that need that extra support, that want someone to come in. So we get a lot of support from those companies.
May I, may
And
I
I
ask,
just want to,
what?
can I just do one ad real quick, Monique? I won't take the conversation, but I just want to say to the
So
audience,
good.
ADRC means Aging Disability
Yes,
Resource Centers. So when we use acronyms, I just want to be
yes.
clear so people will know how to reach out to those services. And I will say Stephanie Houston is our contact at the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute who does those as well. So yeah,
Well,
that's all I
Gina,
wanted to
that
just say.
was
Sorry.
absolutely going to be my question, which was, thank Tasha for sharing resources, right? So for the folks who are tuned in, and then I was going to ask Gina if you could share a resource or a contact, knowing that Tasha's in Dane County and you've got
Yeah.
um, overlap with Dana and Milwaukee.
And so yeah, and so Stephanie is at our office in Milwaukee, and she's connected to the Aging Disability Resource Centers. She's connected to all of our diagnostic memory clinics. She works intimately with the doctors, with the nurses, with the social workers. She is the coordinator for our Amazing Grace Chorus program, which is a resource for families who are living with dementia and their caretaker to actually come together and sing in harmony. But also in that program, we provide one-stop social support services and resources to those families so that they can actually have their loved one have a positive experience. And then, as Tasha was saying, share from a caregiver perspective your challenges. And then we bring in resources right in that same space to say, here's how you can get help and support. And so anything from how to write your, because this is the other thing we don't talk about: long-term care, wills, anything, finances, prescriptions, anything you could think of, we bring to those settings for our families. And then we go in the homes to do in-home assessments. And again, all of this is at no cost. So I'm happy to share go to our webpage, or I won't share Stephanie's number on the webinar, but if you Google us, you'll find us, and then we're at the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute Regional Milwaukee office. So that I did want to share that.
Thank you. And I do want to acknowledge that we are, this has gone fast. So we're getting close to the end of the time. But for those who have tuned in, we have been paying attention to the questions we've been receiving in the comments and definitely trying to provide more information. So I definitely want to let you know that I acknowledge that, that we as a panel acknowledge that, and we are seeing that information and definitely trying to make sure that we put those answers to your comments or questions as well. There was one that I think we may not have answered, which was from someone that is, now 40 years old now, and what should they be thinking about now around prevention? So
yeah, can I just take a stab and then I'll move out the way? But I think what we've been looking at, and we actually talk about that, what we do know is midlife is really an important factor in everything that we do. And by midlife, it's moved from 30 to like 60 or something to that effect. So you're in the window, right? But what it is, it's really about, quite frankly, the data is showing lifestyle intervention is the key risk driver for reduction. And I want to be clear that you cannot necessarily say we can prevent Alzheimer's disease, but we can reduce risk factors. And why is that important? Because you can have some genetic tracing, some genetic relationship to Alzheimer's disease. So some folks, they talk about the ApoE4 gene. That's genetic, and for African Americans, it's more ApoE3, which can be protective. But genetics can play a role. Is my point. But what can we do? They talk about the Mediterranean diet, eating more vegetables, the omega-3 fatty acids, so looking at more fish, taking some of those fried foods out of your diet. I often tell people when they say fish, they don't mean catfish fried on Fridays. That's not quite what they're talking about. Making sure we're having healthy nuts, so you can't eat the whole jar of peanuts. It's more, it really is, and social engagement and connectivity is really critical. So it's really about the exercise threshold is 150 minutes a week. So whatever you do, 30-minute intervals, whatever you get it in. And it doesn't mean running marathons. It's walking. It's just getting the cardio going. It's getting your heart rate going. It's walking is sometimes better than running for some of us, but we really want to be physically active. Those are the critical pieces, quite frankly, that the data is showing that you can do. There was questions about what do we do for mind? Do we do the crossword puzzles? While some of them are saying yes, some data is saying yes and no. So, but definitely anything you can do to stretch and teach, because our brains are elastic and has elasticity, and we're growing and we're knowing. And it has to be something new, though. If you're good at the same crossword puzzle, you're not really stretching yourself. So you got to do something to stretch yourself.
Right. Learn a new language.
Learn a new language. Exactly. Yes. Things that are gonna really impact our brain and force us to stretch our brains. So I did want to say that. And I'm happy to stop here, and so someone else can respond too.
I do want to just and throw it to Lisa, and then we'll wrap up. But one of the things that in some of our pre-discussions, Lisa talked about, alone, isolation. And so definitely, if you just want to share some things around, the caregiver impact on your own life, and, how you really just went through.
So a lot of times everyone wants you to do something with them. So they're always calling like, let's go to dinner, let's go here, or let's plan a trip, and it's like, okay, so that's easy for you because you have one person or your family that you have to consider. I now have to consider my mom. And someone told me, well, just put her in a respite. She'll be fine. And I was like, actually, she won't because her connection isn't necessarily the house. Her connection is Lisa. Yeah. So when I move away from her, and if I put her somewhere where she doesn't know people, then she might have some issues and think I left her. And she might not make it out that respite. So I have to think about that and make sure that whomever's sitting with her or is with her, she's comfortable, she's accepting of that, and she does not accept and receive that well at all. So I see my friends on birthday vacations, or I see them out going to dinner, and I'm sitting at home, or you're sitting watching Facebook and everybody's living their lives. And I'm not.
Yeah.
And it can be a very lonely place at times because you feel like your life is really passing you by, you know? So, but as I told Monique, I do believe in a God that will restore
Mhm.
everything that I have put in and love. So I just fall on that faith, and I'm doing this for a reason. I'm doing this for her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa. And I want to, we are close to time, but there was one last question that came in, and just want to really get that to you all, which was if you could talk more about what signs tell you that helping seniors in the home will no longer work. Thank you for
I was
putting.
hoping you hit on that one because I really wanted to speak to that a little bit. I experience that a lot in my program, and it's really hard to tell people when it gets to that point. For the most part, in Age at Home, we really mean it. People do age at home, and we see people from the beginning to the end quite frequently. But when someone has gotten to the point where the behaviors are so extreme that you can't keep a caregiver in that home, because when you get down to it, when it comes to 24-hour care, all of us need to sleep. So it's not just you anymore. Now you need to incorporate other people into that care. And when that happens, when you get a person who needs that much attention, and when they have it, they are violent because you get the frontal temporal, dementia going on. And that's when things get a little bit different. They get more confrontational. People get aggressive. They get angry. And my program, I hate to have those conversations with families and say, hey, I can't get a caregiver to come back in the home because I can't continue to have them scratched, hit, and things like that. Or you have the other extreme where it's not a behavior, but this person has declined so much and they're in pain and they can't express it and they can't request pain medications. And my program is non-medical, which a lot of 24-hour care is non-medical. The caregivers can't assess, the caregivers can't give certain medications. So now that person has reached a point where you're going to have them either A, in a facility, or B, you're going to have to be that family member that's there, that's given that medication, and hoping that you have a program, which I'm so fortunate to have backing me with our hospice program, that there are nurses that provide that education to the family and that can go in and do it. So when it becomes so much that it becomes 24-hour care and you can't get that support to come in a home, that's when you can no longer have them home. That's what I've noticed.
Thank you so much. And we are at time. I just want to give some really last minute notes because, like I said, you all blew up my plan, which is okay. But I think that this was such rich discussion and so much good information. And what's nice is this has been being recorded. And so folks can go back and re-review and catch pieces that they may not have caught the first time. But, Gina, you set it up so well with the umbrella, the dementia umbrella, the different types of dementia and how Alzheimer's is one of the most common. Renee, the film itself and bringing this project to break down stigmas, to open the doors and really inform people and start this discussion, particularly in communities of color. Thank you for that. Lisa, your vulnerability and sharing the challenges that caregivers face and the impact on your life. And one of the comments you said was that, you fear your daughter, that you may be diagnosed, and what does this mean for your daughter, and things that we think about. And then Tasha, all of the many caregiving tips and the different type of support that's out there, and then just bringing that clinical lens. So I just want to say to each of you, thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. Again, this is recorded. You'll be able to access it on different virtual formats. And I ask everyone to continue to be safe, be well. We are still dealing with COVID-19. So please take proper precautions. And again, thank you to each of you for your time today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
The 2020 Minority Health Film Festival offers a diverse variety of films and events that we just wouldn't be able to offer in the in-person cinema experience. But I think what really makes it unique is the focus not only on public health issues, but the issues that really concern communities of color. If you're looking for a reason to engage or to try it out, this is the perfect time. just go to mkefilm.org/MHFF